Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves, because what I'm about to say won't sit well with the smug elites, the comfortable cynics, or the blind optimists in power. The world is standing at the edge of something seismic, a convergence of ancient prophecy and present-day chaos that is as chilling as it is undeniable. Iran and Israel, two nations locked in a deadly dance, are now the focal points of not just a political crisis, but what many believe could be the countdown to the final hour of human history. Now, I know how that sounds: dramatic, alarmist, perhaps even delusional. But here's the uncomfortable truth. For decades, prophetic voices have warned of a time when the nations would align, wars would threaten Israel, and global instability would shake the very core of civilization. Sound familiar? Because it should. It's happening right now. While world leaders waffle and journalists peddle platitudes, the Middle East is boiling. Missiles fly, alliances shift, and the world watches, clueless or worse, complicit. This isn't just news. This is prophecy, unfolding before our very eyes. And whether you believe it or not, you owe it to yourself to pay attention. The escalating tensions between Iran and Israel are more than just another chapter in the endless saga of Middle Eastern conflict. They represent a convergence of history, ideology, and, for many, prophecy. To understand the gravity of the moment, you must step back and look beyond the headlines and political soundbites. What we are witnessing now is a collision course between two nations whose enmity is rooted not just in politics or land, but in identity, theology, and destiny. Iran's regime is not merely anti-Israel for strategic purposes. Its hostility is deeply ideological. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran has championed a worldview in which Israel is not just a geopolitical rival, but an existential enemy, a symbol of Western dominance and corruption that must be eradicated. Their leaders say this openly. They fund and arm groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad not out of diplomatic necessity, but because they see it as a divine mandate. On the other side, Israel is not simply defending borders, it is defending its very right to exist. Surrounded by hostile actors and often isolated on the world stage, Israel has long been forced into a posture of vigilance. But its strength is not just military, it is historical and prophetic. For centuries, the survival of the Jewish people has defied logic, and many believe it is because they are a people chosen for a specific purpose in human history. The rebirth of Israel in 1948 wasn't just a geopolitical anomaly. It was, for millions, the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. And the threats it now faces from Iran are not interpreted as random acts of aggression, but as yet another chapter in the ongoing spiritual battle that has defined the region for millennia. What makes the current moment so alarming is how many of these tensions are echoing warnings given in ancient texts. Whether you believe in the prophetic scriptures or not, their relevance to today's headlines is, at the very least, uncanny. Ezekiel 38 and 39 speak of a coalition of nations rising up against Israel in the latter days, including Persia, the ancient name for modern-day Iran. The idea of a great northern army advancing on Israel, backed by a confederation of hostile states, was once the stuff of Sunday sermons. Today, it's the stuff of news alerts. Yet the mainstream media largely refuses to connect these dots. They treat prophecy as fantasy, while reporting events that match its descriptions with eerie precision. The world is watching Iran and Israel move closer to direct confrontation, with nuclear ambitions, proxy wars, cyber attacks, and assassinations playing out like a prelude to something far worse. And still, many refuse to acknowledge the possibility that we are seeing more than politics unfold. We may be seeing prophecy revealed. The moment demands more than analysis. It demands attention. Because if these prophecies are right, then what comes next isn't just war. It's the beginning of the final reckoning. Iran's growing alliances with global powers like Russia and China, alongside its expanding influence through proxy militias across the Middle East, signal the emergence of a new axis of power that is changing the geopolitical landscape. This is not just a regional issue anymore. It is a global reshuffling of power dynamics that holds deep prophetic undertones. Iran, once considered a pariah state, is now forging closer ties with authoritarian regimes that share its disdain for Western influence and liberal democracy. These alliances are not accidental. They are strategic, ideological, and increasingly spiritual in nature. Russia and China, both ambitious and authoritarian, see in Iran a partner that can disrupt American dominance and unsettle the fragile order that has existed since the end of World War II. What's more alarming is that this growing coalition bears an uncanny resemblance to the prophetic alliances described in ancient scriptures. In the book of Ezekiel, a confederation led by Gog of Magog aligns itself with Persia, Iran, Cush, and other nations to rise against Israel in the last days. Many scholars have long debated the identities of these ancient names, but current alignments make the picture clearer than ever before. Russia's role as a northern power backing Iran's military and nuclear programs is not only real, it's intensifying. China's economic support and mutual opposition to Western sanctions bind them even further together. And Iran's use of proxy militias in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen gives it a reach far beyond its borders, a reach that allows it to encircle Israel with hostile forces. What's happening is the slow, deliberate construction of a war machine. Iran supplies the ideology, Russia offers the military clout, and China provides the money and global cover. Together, they form a triad that directly challenges the West and, more specifically, targets Israel. And while the West debates human rights, holds summits, and dithers over policy statements, this new axis is arming, advancing, and aligning for what looks more and more like an inevitable conflict. These aren't vague diplomatic shifts. These are tectonic movements in the global order, and they are happening with startling speed. For those who study prophecy, these developments are chilling confirmations of what has long been foretold. The idea of a united front of hostile powers rising against Israel was once dismissed as apocalyptic fiction. Today, it reads like tomorrow's headlines. The implications are staggering. If these nations truly unite militarily, and that possibility grows more realistic with each passing month, then the world will not just face another war. It will face a confrontation with apocalyptic overtones, one that may well usher in global upheaval unlike anything seen before. The rise of this new axis is not a coincidence. It is deliberate, calculated, and for many, foretold. And if the patterns continue, we are not heading toward peace or stability. We are hurtling toward a final confrontation that history, politics, and prophecy have all pointed to for generations. Israel is not just another nation embroiled in conflict, it is the epicenter of a much larger story, both politically and prophetically. No other country in the world draws as much scrutiny, provokes as much controversy, or evokes as much passion as Israel. Barely the size of New Jersey, it commands global attention in a way that vastly larger and more powerful nations do not. And this is no accident. Since its re-establishment in 1948, an event that stunned the world and many saw as a direct fulfillment of biblical prophecy, Israel has been at the center of a great unfolding drama that transcends modern geopolitics. It is the flashpoint, the trigger, the ground zero of a potential world-altering event. Every major conflict in the Middle East, every negotiation, every skirmish, every terrorist attack involving or targeting Israel seems to carry more weight than it should for a nation of its size. That's because Israel's role is not merely strategic, it is spiritual. In the prophetic scriptures, Israel is portrayed as God's timepiece, the nation through which the timeline of the end unfolds. Whether one believes in the Bible or not, it is impossible to ignore the disproportionate centrality Israel holds in world affairs. The tension surrounding Jerusalem, the contested capital, is itself a prophetic indicator. The book of Zechariah warns that in the last days, Jerusalem would become a cup of trembling for all nations. And today it is exactly that, a city at the heart of a 1,000-year conflict that the United Nations, the Vatican, and countless global powers continue to argue over, but never resolve. Iran's repeated calls to wipe Israel off the map are not just political rhetoric. They are genocidal declarations rooted in an ideology that views Israel's very existence as an affront to their vision of a divine order. That's why Israel takes every threat seriously. It has to. For Israel, every war, every missile launched, every terrorist plot is existential. It is not a question of diplomacy. It is a question of survival. And this urgency, this constant vigilance, is exactly what prophecy describes. In the book of Ezekiel, Israel is portrayed as a land of unwalled villages that becomes the object of a surprise invasion by a confederation of hostile nations. What's astonishing is that modern Israel, with its confidence in its defense systems and international alliances, does appear today to live in relative security, a state that could easily be shattered in a sudden attack. Israel's resilience is unmatched. Despite being surrounded by enemies and demonized by international institutions, it thrives. Economically, militarily, and technologically, it punches far above its weight. But its survival is more than a testament to good governance or strong defense. For many, it is proof of divine favor, a miracle playing out on the world stage. And in that miracle lies a warning. The closer the world draws to Israel's borders in conflict, the closer we may be to witnessing the fulfillment of prophecies that have warned of a final, decisive battle. You'd think by now the world would have learned to pay attention. Yet here we are, hurtling headlong toward a precipice, while the very voices that sounded the alarm ages ago are dismissed as relics of superstition. The political class is too busy juggling polls and photo ops to entertain anything that falls outside the acceptable narrative. The media, ever eager for ratings, churns out breathless coverage of every doomed summit and every catastrophic headline. Yet they draw a firm line at examining whether these events fit patterns that were laid out in prophetic texts centuries ago. It's as if any mention of prophecy instantly disqualifies you from serious debate, consigning the discussion to late-night fringe talk shows. Meanwhile, the signs are stacking up like dominoes. We see shifting alliances that mirror ancient alliances, wars erupting in places named in scriptures, and even the rhetoric from certain regimes that echoes language found in apocalyptic passages. But instead of asking, could this be more than coincidence? Our leaders shrug and offer us another press release. Nothing to see here, they insist, as though insisting something isn't ominous somehow erases the threat. And the public, fed on a diet of cynicism and sound bites, quietly nods along, too distracted by celebrity scandals and corporate-sponsored reality to notice the weight of history pressing down on us. Let's call it what it is: willful ignorance. Prophecy has been dismissed as the province of fanatics, yet no one balks when politicians quote polling data or pivot tables. We accept the word of any expert who demeans prophetic interpretation, even though the same experts have been spectacularly wrong about nearly every major geopolitical forecast of the last decade. Who remembers the warnings before the Arab Spring, or the hubris-laden predictions that ISIS would evaporate the moment the US left Iraq? Yet when ministers of ancient truth step forward, their message is greeted with ridicule rather than scrutiny. This isn't academic. If you refuse to entertain the possibility that there's a coherent narrative unfolding, one that ancient prophets outlined in astonishing detail, you blind yourself to the patterns that could save lives. Imagine being the pilot of a passenger jet who ignores the warning lights because they don't match the pilot's manual. That's exactly the situation we're in. As missiles fly and cyber attacks escalate, we clutch at conventional wisdom, pretending everything is business as usual. But business as usual blew up in 2001, in 2003, and again in 2011. We see the tremors of a far greater quake forming, and still we don't ask why the ancient texts warned precisely of this kind of upheaval. In the end, the scoffing elites will have to answer for their indifference. Because when the final reckoning comes, and make no mistake, a reckoning is coming, it won't matter how many think tanks you consulted or how many focus groups you polled. What will matter is whether we had the courage to heed the warnings, to look beyond the comfortable confines of secular analysis, and to prepare for a future that our ancestors saw coming long before we did. And if we fail to do that, history will note how we were warned and how we chose to ignore it. There comes a moment in history when the warnings are no longer subtle, when the signs are no longer abstract, and when the trajectory of world events no longer allows for neutrality. We are approaching that moment. Whether one holds a religious worldview or not, the convergence of military, political, economic, and spiritual indicators suggests that we are heading toward a decisive turning point. For those who follow biblical prophecy, it's not just a critical moment, it is the final hour. The term may sound dramatic, but when the stakes are global collapse, mass destruction, and irreversible upheaval, dramatic is merely accurate. What's striking is how rapidly the pieces are falling into place. The fragility of world economies, the rise of artificial intelligence and surveillance states, the breakdown of traditional values, the persecution of religious groups, and the unrelenting tension in the Middle East. All of it is happening simultaneously. This is not random. It's not coincidence. It resembles what prophecy described thousands of years ago, a world in chaos, crying for order, ripe for a global crisis that would eventually usher in a false peace, a deceptive unity, and ultimately confrontation with truth. The build-up is not a slow simmer anymore, it's a boil. Israel sits at the center of it, not because it seeks it, but because it was destined to be there. The increasing aggression from Iran, the silence or appeasement from Western powers, and the growing chorus of global condemnation against Israel are all part of a pattern. According to prophecy, the nations would turn against Israel. That shift has already begun. What was once unthinkable, open hostility toward the only democratic ally of the West in the region, has now become normalized in diplomatic circles and media narratives. What does this tell us? That the global conscience is hardening, that the stage is being set for a conflict far greater than any we've seen before. At the same time, we're seeing a disturbing spiritual vacuum. Faith is mocked, morality is diluted, and truth is treated as relative. This cultural decay mirrors prophetic warnings of a time when people would love pleasure more than truth, when deception would reign and when lawlessness would increase. And in that vacuum, people are growing more desperate, searching for answers, for meaning, for stability. That desperation is fertile ground for control, for manipulation, for the rise of a figure who promises peace but brings destruction. Scripture warns of such a figure, a deceiver who rises in the final hour. He will not come as a tyrant first, but as a unifier, and the world, exhausted and blinded, will welcome him. This isn't fear-mongering. It's recognition. Recognition that the warnings we've ignored are becoming reality. Recognition that time is short. Whether this hour is the final one or simply its shadow, it demands urgency, awareness, and clarity. Because once the final hour strikes, the chance to prepare ends. And in that moment, we will not be judged by how well we predicted it, but by whether we were ready when it came.